SEO is not a great channel for validating startup ideas. So if you're operating in that kind of lean startup mindset of saying, I'm going to look at all of these assumptions, pick the riskiest one and knock that assumption down first, you're going to be a long way down the track. If you focus too much on the user experience to the detriment of the channels that bring you those users, then you're not going to have any users to have an experience. Google cares that visitors to your website like the experience. Well, okay, fine, but every company wants to build a good user experience, don't they? I mean, anyway. But you realize actually there's a lot of terrible websites out there. So we see it with advertising just being overrunning the website, ad tech causing it to be slow to load, hard to use, difficult and frustrating to actually find the content that you're looking for. That's a classic. You need to keep iterating. You need to keep looking for the ways to gather the best of both worlds, or at least to mitigate the downsides.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Sidon Podcast. I'm Anastasia, the head of product management and business analysis at Sidon.
And I'm Yura, CEO of Sidon Digital Product Design Agency.
In this podcast, we talk with great minds from product companies about their career paths, about lessons learned, and vision of the future.
Guys, right now 90% of our viewers and listeners are not subscribed yet. Please make us a favor, subscribe and turn on notification, because it helps us a lot to bring more great guests to the project, and this will also help us to bring more value to you.
Today we have an amazing person, Will Critchlow. He is the CEO and founder of SearchPilot and founder and CEO of a Distill company. So person with more than 20 years, I think, experience and SEO. So really happy to have you here today, and we're looking forward to talk about this amazing topic.
Welcome, Will. You're a great inspiration for us, especially for me, as also a founder of agency, that you never stop. You decided to move forward, and it looks like you are a great expert in what you are doing. So it would be happy to learn a lot from you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. And yeah, the 20 years flies by.
Yeah. So maybe we can start a small introduction about your journey. Why have you actually started in this domain? For me, even if I work in tech, SEO is kind of a black box. I know what the results should be, but what's going on inside, it's kind of magic.
Well, what we're doing now is trying to make it a bit less magic and actually turn it a little bit more scientific. But going all the way back, the reason that I got into this area really was, so I've always been interested in business generally. My dad ran his own company, and I grew up around kind of small business, I guess. And my co-founder and I knew that we wanted to run a business together long before we knew what that business was going to be. So that's half the equation, I think. The other half being technology. And I was a teenager in the 90s. I remember the first time I had access to the internet, the first time that we got that at home, the real problems it was solving. My co-founder and I used to carry floppy disks into school every day to swap the work the business ideas that we'd been doing back and forth. And when we could actually network our computers and send an email or send files directly, that was kind of revolutionary. So I've always been a fan of technology, a user of technology, I guess. And where we started was just putting those things together, just realizing that this was in the late 90s. My co-founder and I started building websites. But then I think that was kind of even more on the technology side. And what pulled it back towards the business side was realizing that building the website wasn't enough. And that if we wanted to help these, at the time they were small local businesses who are our customers, our clients, we needed to be able to help them get more visible, get more people finding their business online. And that led us to SEO, because it was kind of the only game in town in 2005 when we were starting, before Twitter, before Facebook newsfeed, before all the other kinds of social media, really. And paid search and organic search were were really all there was.
So how do you foresee the market change in, I don't know, a couple of years? It's hard to predict in 10 years, but maybe at least in 5, and how it will change with AI.
It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to living through that time. So a few things that are interesting. Firstly, I don't think it's necessarily true that the rise of artificial intelligence agents, or whatever we want to call them, our kind of personal assistants, necessarily means that we will use Google less. It may well be that Google is a primary provider of these things. And actually, probably my biggest prediction is that the rise of large language models and this kind of artificial intelligent agent chatbot experience, I think this is in the geeky language of Clayton Christensen, I think this is a sustaining innovation rather than a disruptive one. And so I say this as a paying subscriber of OpenAI's ChatGPT, so I'm paying another provider for it at the moment, but I'm not convinced that this isn't just something that becomes part of Google, and certainly part of a search engine in the broadest sense. So I don't think it's necessarily um,
Hmm.
that much in
Yeah,
conflict.
but we also see tools like Perplexity AI that try to compete with Google, so they do their own search. But it will also change perhaps that you will be doing agent search optimization. You will be optimizing not for people but for chatbots, for copilots,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and at
So
the end.
Perplexity is great. I use that as well. And I think if literally yesterday, as we're recording this on the 9th of February, is literally yesterday, Google announced the public availability of what it's now calling Gemini, right? What used to be Bard. And I had a little play with that. And I think that's very promising. I don't think it's at all obvious that Google is technologically behind any of these other providers. What would make me wrong, I think, is if they can't figure out a way to make it compatible with their business model, because the new upstarts, the OpenAIs and the Perplexities and the like, don't have this constraint, which is a weird constraint, of making hundreds of billions of dollars from search advertising. And that is a constraint on Google, because if Google was suddenly to release something that was better for users, but cut off that stream of search advertising, well, I mean, they're not going to do that, right? They're going to stop before they get to that point. And so that's what would make it a disruptive innovation in the Christensen language. So I may be wrong, but that's part of it. I think actually that's my strongest prediction. I think the one that's most relevant to my work, and maybe to other folks who are operating in the SEO space, is I don't think websites are going away. If we're talking on the 5-year, even 10-year horizon, I think websites persist. Websites will still be a thing, visited by people as well as by smart agents, right? So yes, your robot might visit the website too, but I think you will also. And I think a lot of the prediction of the doom side of this actually looks a lot like the doom that we heard in 2007, 2008, when social media was on that kind of crazy up. Do you remember when Twitter was just taking off, and every day it was like, this new person's on Twitter, that new person's on Twitter, this celebrity is doing this on Twitter, this news article broke on Twitter, whatever, it was all Twitter, and Facebook newsfeed at a similar time. And there was a lot of prediction back then that as social media grew, search volume would decline. And in fact, that's not what happened. They turned out to be complementary to one another. They both grew. And search is up radically since then. And I actually think human search is going to continue to grow as we get this explosion in, as you say, agent search, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, so I think that industry, at least for a few years, will grow because now there will be a lot of work to optimize for Gemini and all the bots, so they will find your content. And there are already some tricks like writing more like frequently asked questions sections, because they usually tend to reply for questions. And this kind of content helps you to be first in their output, even if you are on the search page on the Google. And also optimizing for agents that can click through websites and just book tables or order some stuff. People will not trust at the end their bots to finish orders, but you will want the bot to conduct the booking and then bring the user to your site to finish something. So maybe it would be not so important uh, everything on the website, but like bringing this agent to your website would be important. Oh, okay. What about the products in the industry? Do you think that there is still place for new search engine optimization software to come up now because of this AI change? Because I see a lot of products that help to write content, but what about other software that help to get on the ranking?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I kind of broadly subscribe to the. I guess it's the Andreessen Horowitz view of software is eating the world. We talked before about the agency model. These days, I'm running a software business and happy and excited to be doing that. I think the opportunity for software is already huge, but is growing and will continue to grow. And so I think the short answer is yes. There's tons of opportunity out there. Um, what I think is interesting, actually, though, is what opportunities are going to come in what order and how soon. And I think there's a lot of buzz right now about these search generative experience or whatever you call it, the embedding of chat into search results. I think that may turn out to be an evolutionary dead end. I'm very bullish on large language models generally and on artificial intelligence, but specifically chat interface in the search results. I'm not sure, because I think that conversation feels slow quite often right now and inefficient. And so I think there are probably some evolutionary dead ends that software is going to go down, saying, hey, here's a solution to tracking how many mentions you get in SGE for different kind of query, the equivalent of the kind of tools that we've got in keyword land. And some of those will turn out to be useful, but I think many will not, because I think for all of the disruptive power of SGE, and we've seen this with OpenAI's ChatGPT integration into Bing, for example, it's fractions of a percent of the total search volume right now. And so if you're a search professional, you have to be aware of these things and you have to understand what's coming down the track. But what's working right now is still going to be a lot of the kind of humans searching in relatively traditional human ways. And so the short answer is yes, there's tons of opportunity, but I also think there's going to be a lot of froth, a lot of noise, a lot of stuff built that is not necessarily long-term sustainable. That's fine, that's just good capitalism. But I do think there's going to be quite a lot of that kind of froth and churn.
Maybe we can now talk about application of the SEO on the products. Recently, we have a client who approached us with an idea, and one of his riskiest assumption was relying on traffic. And since this was an early stage startup and they only had an idea, it's really hard to understand if they need to incorporate and think about SEO at the very beginning, starting day one, or this is something they can work on later on, and how to make these decisions, because obviously you may need to invest a lot of resources into creating this architecture and like proper keywords and maybe a lot of content that should be in this website or the product, while you need to validate the idea first. This is one thing. And another, it's competition, because this product was in the domain of real estate and there is a lot of there already. And how can you beat up the existing proposition and to at least have your offerings in like top results? So what would you advise to this founder, how they can like think of SEO at the very beginning? What should they do?
So it's a great question. It's also a very big question. Let's see how much we can do justice to it. So I would say, first of all, there's two different kinds of risk embedded in what you're talking about there. One kind of risk is there is definitely demand. People are searching, and we would be a great answer if only we could rank. And if we were to rank for those things, we would get valuable traffic that would convert and we would do great. And the risk is, can we appear for this highly competitive search term? That's one kind of risk. There's a totally different kind of risk, which is we're building something that is different enough that it isn't exactly something people are searching for right now. And a lot of startups are in that second camp. And I would say in the second camp, the answer is simpler. The answer is SEO is not your first channel. You're not going to validate your product demand by trying to kind of capture and pivot search demand. People who are searching for kind of related things, and then you say, hey, but actually we have this 10x better solution, but it's not what you were searching for. That does not happen on day one. That doesn't happen in year one. That has to be built quite a lot slower over time, and you're going to be looking more at channels like PR and social, and you have to be putting the idea in front of people who hadn't even considered that they were looking for your thing. So in that case, it's a simple SEO is not channel one for you. In the first case, I would actually say it's still mainly SEO is not a great channel for validating startup ideas. So if you're operating in that kind of lean startup mindset of saying, I'm going to look at all of these assumptions, pick the riskiest one and knock that assumption down first, you're going to be a long way down the track. If you're saying, well, we need to rank in organic search and get the majority of our search traffic, the majority of our business through organic rankings, and until we do that, we can't do anything else. That's a very, very difficult bootstrap problem. It is solvable. We've seen startups break into very established markets. I mean, you think about even when someone like Airbnb launched, those searches of places to stay in London or New York were incredibly competitive searches, even at the point when Airbnb launched, but they had such a radically different proposition that they were able to win over those search markets. But I would say they did that as a result, not as it wasn't like step one, we have to rank for places to stay in New York, and then we can build a business off the back of it. They had to kind of bootstrap their way there a little bit more. So those opportunities are there, but I would say they're not there very often in a lean startup. Validate that as the first point area. And so we don't generally work at SearchPilot. We don't generally work with startups in their early stages because for precisely that reason. SEO is really is the biggest channel for most established businesses online, but it's rarely where you get your first, million visitors or 100,000 visitors or whatever it might be. And the tricky part, though, is if you are in one of those spaces like real estate, where organic search is clearly going to be your dominant channel in 10 years' time, you've got to start somewhere. And it's that kind of classic, I think it's a Chinese proverb of the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago, but the second best time is now. And you kind of do need to start laying that groundwork for being the successful business you want to be, even though it may be a slow payoff. And that is very hard for a startup to prioritize. So what my advice in that situation, and I don't do this kind of consulting anymore, but my advice would be get the foundational technical side of things right from the outset, because it's broadly no more expensive to do it right than to do it wrong. So you might as well do it right. Get the website built in a good way, get that technical foundation built the right way, because there's no downside really. And then build out that, in many cases, you can build out that kind of content strategy and content development piece, again, in ways that are compatible with the long-term success you're seeking. And so you're going to be building a lot of those landing pages for all kinds of reasons. They're going to end up being organic search landing pages, but maybe that's not the biggest source of traffic to them. That maybe that's not the biggest channel in month one. But fairly quickly into many, certainly B2C startups life cycle, we see organic search overtaking and becoming the biggest channel, at which point then, yes, it's a flywheel. Then you can really invest in it. But it's rarely going to be the way that you validate the hypothesis, I think.
Yeah, because product managers sometimes rely on this fake doors testing. They can launch the website and like wait for people to come up and like check how the conversions work. But they probably will need to rely more on advertising rather than organic traffic.
Yes, I'm not a paid search expert. Kind of used to be many years ago, but I'm not really these days. But I think that's a classic use case for paid search. If you know that the demand is there, so people are doing the searching, and you need to validate that if they find your website, they're going to like it. That's what that works perfectly, even from day one. Where in a way that organic search is too slow burn, even if it's long run better ROI, which hopefully is.
And what are typical mistakes that companies sometimes do with their websites that when you come up, you see that everything is totally wrong and you need to fix everything with?
So these days we tend to work with very successful websites. They're large websites with tons of visibility, tons of organic traffic, and we're helping them beat their competitors and get even further ahead. So we don't tend to see fundamental mistakes so much these days. In my consulting years, we did, and you'd see everything from accidentally blocking the entire site from being crawled by Google to publishing a staging site to the web and having no index, for example, and just literally saying to Google, "We don't want to appear in your index." Those kind of things are easy to debug typically because traffic goes to basically zero. What I would say we see more of these days is a disconnect between the realization that actually users are fun people. The actual humans who come on your website, notwithstanding the conversation we were having earlier about smart agents, is users use your website and they need to like it. And if I think probably an underappreciated development in particularly Google, particularly over the last 5 years, 7 years, is they care about those same things. Google cares that visitors to your website like the experience. And they're not always great at incorporating this into the algorithm, though they're improving at it. But I think as a direction of travel, as kind of saying, what's going to be more true in 5 years time than it was 5 years ago, I would put my money on saying, I think user experience as a broad ranking factor, I'm not talking about literally Google having a line in their algorithm saying if user experience detail is good, then, but more just the sites that rank are going to have a better user experience, and the ones that have a worse user experience are going to perform worse. So then you say, well, okay, fine, but every company wants to build a good user experience, don't they? I mean, anyway, but you realize actually there's a lot of terrible websites out there. So we see it with advertising just being overrunning the website, ad tech causing it to be slow to load, hard to use, difficult and frustrating to actually find the content that you're looking for. That's a classic that I see even on very large successful websites. Site speed being part of that kind of thing. When we get down further into the details, it tends to be not major mistakes like that. Most of our experiments, most of the tests that we get to run are not as dramatic as saying, "Hey, if we make your website radically better, does it perform better?" We tend to be down in the tweaks. So our job these days is finding the small ways that you can continually improve.
Well, how would you recommend to find a balance? For example, the website is very rich in media. They need to have a lot of images, videos, and it objectively needs to load longer. And then Google tells it's speed is not so good. You're not green, you're yellow, for example. So should you prefer to be always in a green area and not have so much media or lower quality media? Or it's okay if you prefer to focus on the user experience?
It's a balance. I mean, if you focus too much on the user experience to the detriment of the channels that bring you those users, then you're not going to have any users to have an experience. And so you do need to think holistically about this. And I think that's the key is thinking holistically. If genuinely it needs multimedia content, as you say, aging, show my age by calling it multimedia content probably, but we talk about CD-ROMs next. That you do need that. Now, do you need to make your site slow loading on every page? And I would say in many cases there's a lot of smart technical moves you can make so that only the user who wants to consume the video has to load the video, for example. Those kinds of sensible decisions along the way make sense. The way we approach a lot of this kind of thinking, we talk about full funnel testing, which is not something that I hear a great deal about in the industry. So we combine our core business is SEO testing. So testing whether a particular change is going to result in more search visibility. But we can also run a conversion rate test. We can also run user experience tests based on saying, we'd like we want this change to cause our users to be happier, to do more of the things that we're hoping they're going to do on the website. And when we combine those things, we call that a full funnel test. So we're saying, okay, we have a hypothesis, we're going to make this particular change to these landing pages, and we hope that that is going to both increase search visibility and improve user experience on those pages. And we can measure both those things independently and in conjunction and say, what's the net impact? And occasionally you do see an effect in different directions. Occasionally you do see that a change has a positive user experience impact, but a negative visibility impact, for example. And what we counsel our customers to do in those situations is not just to kind of throw your hands up and say, I guess we can't, tough, we have to compromise then. And it's more to say that's a sign that you need to keep iterating. You need to keep looking for the ways to gather the best of both worlds, or at least to mitigate the downsides. And so a classic example of this is we see it with e-commerce websites on what they call in the industry PLPs, right? Product listing pages. Outside the industry, they often call them category pages or subcategory pages. And there's a lot of discussion and debate about what should be on those pages beyond literally just a list of products. Do you want to describe the category? Do you want other imagery that isn't just the specific list of products that are on there? What kind of rich information might you want on there? And that's an area where we've seen some of these tests that go in different directions, where you might say, look, putting a paragraph of text at the top of the page means it ranks better, but it converts worse. And so those are the kind of classic situations where you need to kind of iterate and say, well, is that true even if we improve the quality of the content? Does the ranking benefit stay even if we move that content further down the page? You can iterate through different avenues. And that's not to say they're always aligned, but I think, again, coming back to the direction of travel, we anticipate those things being more aligned in the future than they are in the past. So the more that we can get towards great user experience, the more that we can believe, if not trust, that that's going to help us in visibility terms over time as well.
Thanks. So if you're a huge company, corporation, perhaps you have a team that is iterating daily and trying to improve everything. If you're a smaller company and you still want to run A/B tests, how often should you do it? Is it like when you're doing major redesign, then you try to check if the new design is better than the previous one, or like it's a quarterly approach, or how would you recommend to work
I
with it?
think it really comes down to the scale of your operation in terms of how big is the website right now? How many people are visiting it? How scaled up is that web operation? The more traffic it's getting right now, the more opportunity and value there is in testing more. The smaller you are, the earlier you are on that journey, the more you have to take, opinionated, hopefully intelligent guesses about what the market's going to want, because running the test would take too long, or maybe isn't even possible to reach statistical significance. And I could talk about this from my own experience. We relaunched our own SearchPilot.com website last summer, and we didn't test it at all. We showed it. We did some kind of qualitative, subjective user tests to say, showing it to some of our customers and prospects and saying, does this answer your questions? Does this work for you? But as a small B2B SaaS website, we don't have enough traffic to run our own kind of tests, nor really a conversion rate test. And we're actually doing some conversion rate work this year to iterate and improve. But we just had to take a fairly opinionated view that says, well, look, we think this is better than what we had before. We think there's value in pushing on. Conversely, I think if you have reached that scale, and we talk quite often to not necessarily very early stage startups, but that kind of scale up stage, many of them, in my opinion, should be investing much, much more in that team, that software, that support, that testing program, that external support, whatever it might be, because I think this is a massively underinvested channel. I mentioned that organic search is still, in 2024, the biggest channel, certainly for new customers, the biggest channel for the vast majority of websites that we see. And it's also the biggest growth channel for most of them, right? Most of the people are not number one in their market, and the number one player is significantly bigger. And so there is a ton of growth opportunity and headroom. And yet it's the least understood channel. You think about how much data you have about your email marketing, about your paid search, about your social advertising, and it's way more typically. And you understand, yes, I can spend more money over here and that will result in more business over there in ways that organic search, historically at least, and this is obviously what we're trying to change, but in ways that organic search has not done and has not been able to do. So yeah, my answer is kind of twofold, I guess. For a lot of folks, the answer is you can't really test those things, and you've got to just build the best plan you can from comparative data and best practices and research. And then once you reach a certain size and scale, you should be testing as much as you can. And yes, that does mean investing more and building out that kind of testing culture and testing experimentation program, not just doing it ad hoc when you have a major redesign, for example.
If I understand correctly, it's based on number of daily visitors, perhaps around 1,000 people a day on a page.
That's
And
when we
also,
say that it's possible to run an SEO test. Is roughly at the kind of 1,000 organic sessions per day to the site section. So not to an individual page necessarily, but to a group of pages that have a similar page structure, whether that's product pages or destination pages. Whether it's sensible to be testing is much more of a business model question. How valuable are those users? How much is an extra 10% of traffic worth to you? Is it worth staffing out a team designed to hunt that down? Because, if you're a multi-billion dollar e-commerce retailer with a 50% gross margin, you should staff out that team, I think. Like that's something you should be investing heavily in. If you're a media publisher who makes a few dollars CPM and you have, tens of thousands of visitors, then no, you can't afford to be staffing out that kind of team, and you're going to have to grow the business first before you're able to really run those rigorous tests.
it's because you need somebody in your team who will do it. Yes. So it's
Yes, I mean, you can obviously outsource some of it. You can work with agencies, you can work with partners, work with software vendors, but all of those things come with costs. And whether it's costs in your time, costs in staff costs, or costs with suppliers and vendors, then yeah, it's not cheap, but the opportunity is massive for so many of the folks with large websites and scalable sections that make them real money.
no. Should you ask your designers to learn about A/B testing? Should you ask your marketing manager to learn about A/B testing, or it's a profession and there should be people who are focusing only on that?
Probably a scale question as well. I personally think it's something that everybody should be interested in. Everybody who touches any of those areas should be curious, should be interested. You mentioned, in fact, this is part of your origin story. I think that part of the fun of design is making stuff that works, not just stuff that looks pretty. So I think every designer, every product owner, every marketing manager should want to be effective. And effectiveness comes from understanding an element of the data. And that doesn't mean you have to be a statistician, but understanding the concepts at least. I think whether the experiments are run by those people or whether they're run by dedicated data professionals is really a question of scale and specialization. And are you able to justify having that as an individual, a team, a department? We see the whole gamut of those things, but I wouldn't let the kind of statistical side of things put you off from running those experiments. I think even in a small company, folks can use, whether it's like MailChimp's A/B testing on your email side of things or simple website experiments. You can do those things even if you're not a statistician. And I think actually when you read about this on the internet, you see, in my opinion, too many statisticians who get too hung up on the fact that it is a very complex area if you really want to understand it down to the kind of academic level. But in a small business, that's probably not the priority. And we have a saying at SearchPilot, we talk a lot about how we're doing business, not science. And what I mean by that is if you work for a pharmaceutical company and you've got a new heart attack drug that you're hoping is going to work, then of course you need to run that to like amazing levels of statistical confidence and scientific accuracy and really rigorous statistical tests, because the cost of getting it wrong is so high. In business, for the most part, this is not life and death, and actually speed is important, and being directionally confident is more important than being absolutely certain every time. And so we spend a lot of time saying our experimentation programs and our tests should inform your ability to move in broadly the right direction faster than your competitors. And if you can move with more confidence and be right more often and go move quicker, then that's how you can outperform the competition.
I'll be then again maybe rechanneling our conversation to one more topic. So right now you're leading the team of specialists, and you have like a product that helps businesses to improve their SEO. So maybe we can talk about the transition from being a service company to launching the product and transitioning to a service to a product company. So maybe you can tell, like, because it involves the change in the organization structure, hiring people, like it's launching an entire differently business. So what was your journey here? Like, was it a very slow transition to this product, and you first started on like launching the POC and working on some concepts of the product as a kind of pet project with your team, or you straight away like launched it as a mm, product idea and validated it and launched it to the market?
Everything takes longer than you think. I think that's the well, I forget who is. There's a law named after someone, isn't there, that everything takes longer than you think, even when you factored in the fact that everything takes longer than you think. So we had a goal, a dream initially, or as an agency, of being technology enabled, technology enhanced. And I think that's very common. I think many agencies look for this as a way of improving their margins, their client retention, ultimately their valuation. And so we formed an R&D team, research and development, just kind of looking for ways that we could be a better agency was the brief in the early days. And we built a few things that helped at the margin, but the idea that would become SearchPilot was just one of those things, and it was a much bigger bet. But we took an approach a little bit like you described with your client, of trying to knock down the biggest questions one by one. And yes, that did take some time. So we had a hack week initially of saying, just literally technologically, can we build a thing that is fast enough and operates in the way that we want it to operate to build the eventual product, which knocked down the kind of technology hurdle. It then took a lot longer to knock down the market demand hurdle, because this is basically an entirely new sector, an entirely new area. And we went from first revenue a few years ago to, it was still a few years before we spun SearchPilot out as an independent business. So the transition basically went R&D project, first revenue, then we turned it into a business unit within the agency. So it had its own P&L. So the finances kept track of it as a group. It had its own staff allocated to it, and we put a general manager in charge of it. In fact, it's the guy who's now the COO of the whole business, was the VP in charge of that kind of division. And we had a couple of years operating like that, growing it within the agency. And the vision kind of evolved over time, and then we had this opportunity that came along to spin it out and turn it into its own business, which was mainly enabled by the fact that we had this acquisition interest in the agency. So Distilled, the agency, was bought ultimately by a company called Brain Labs, and Brain Labs integrated Distilled into that and is doing very successfully. And the Brain Labs SEO division is what has grown out of the old Distilled team. And the fact that they were basically interested in exactly the bit that we as founders were most ready to move on from. They wanted the agency, and we wanted the software. And so there was an obvious deal to be done there. And that's, it obviously took us a little while to navigate through it, but that's essentially where we ended up. Is they continue to run the agency and the evolution of that old Distilled team, and we took the software business. They helped with some finance to get it up and running in that first year, which we've now paid back and bought out. So we're back to independent. SearchPilot is now an independent, bootstrap, standalone software business. And yeah, so the evolution goes R&D project, first revenue, business unit, then spin out, and then finally independent, standing on its own 2 feet startup.
And since you have experienced both worlds, what would you say are biggest differences in this product culture and service culture? Like differences in mindset or maybe motivation of people working there?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting actually that we've got a lot of the team that has made that transition. So we spun out with, I think it was 12 people from the old distilled team. That may not have included me. I may not be counting myself in that. Anyway, 12 to 14 people in that kind of range. And the majority of those people are still with SearchPilot. So a lot of our team has actually gone on that journey with us, which is excellent, superb. Really proud and pleased of that. We've also tried to, perhaps unusually for a software company, retain some elements of the service culture that I think often, and we hear this in our customer feedback, is we have a professional services team. We don't want to build an agency again, but we do want our customers to get that kind of very personal, very hands-on customer success experience. And so we've retained a lot of that, and I think that's actually a differentiator of SearchPilot, one of our competitive advantages. The biggest changes are, there's some two big changes to the business model that I think make a radical difference. One is the um, the the nature of what recurring revenue looks like, and retention and churn and upsell and those kinds of areas, which I think every agency tries to make their revenue as recurring as possible. But with the best will in the world, it's always less recurring than recurring software revenue. So I think that dynamic of operating in a world of metrics around churn and net revenue retention and so forth, we've had to really level up our understanding of the financial metrics that go around that. And there's a surprising unlock of just the way that cash flow works. So, an agency typically can be cash flow positive very early, but broadly speaking, collects the money as the work goes along, right? You bill monthly typically. Software is not bought like that. I think probably as a legacy of the fact that it used to be physical, shrink wrapped delivery of software. It's paid for in chunks, and so we typically get to bill. Most of our customers are on at least annual contracts. A number of them are on 2 or 3 year contracts, and they typically pay annually in advance, and that unlocks a kind of funding model that is not available for agency growth. And even though we've not taken outside investment, effectively our customers are our investors, and we have to treat them that way. And so that enables us to grow faster than we'd be able to otherwise. I think everything else is more evolutionary. So we're investing a lot at the moment in improving the way that we think about product development, and ensuring that we're building the things that our customers most want and need, and that we're building those things in the right way. And I think that's probably one of our biggest learning journeys. Is it's incredibly easy to get sucked into building things that don't actually help the customer, and they sound like a good idea, they look like a good idea, and nobody uses them. And I think that's our biggest current learning area, where I think we're improving most rapidly in that area, which is quite exciting.
What about B2B sales? I know that you moved to a segment of bigger corporations. So at the beginning, you started to trying to serve different kind of clients. Now you're focusing on specific niche. Uh, was it hard to focus on this kind of sales? Because in agency business, perhaps you had a different sales experience than selling product, or it's very similar and it helped you.
It's similar. Actually, I think it depends who you're comparing to, but I think compared to many software startups, the agency sales model helped us specifically, because even a small agency project is quite expensive software. If you think about I don't know, 40, 50,000 pound or dollar agency project, which is not that big, right? Even SearchPilot spent that order of magnitude on a new website, a new CRM. We've done projects that size, and we're tiny compared to our target market. When you think about the cost of software, I think a lot of software startups are scared of charging more than $100 a month or something. There's this idea that because the computer's doing it, it should be cheap somehow. And that was not a hang up we ever had. We've made plenty of mistakes, but I think charging too little is not one of them. And so our experience of selling 5 and 6 figure agency deals helped with our experience of doing enterprise. Well, it's quite enterprise software sales, right? If you're talking a 6-figure software deal, that's quite enterprise. We haven't yet done our first 7-figure one, but I hope that comes along soon. What I think is different is that there are a lot more stakeholders involved in a large software sale. So it's not the monetary size that is different, because we'd sold hundreds of thousands of consulting work. It's that when you buy an agency or a consultancy, they just really deliver to their stakeholder. They just deliver to the person whose budget it is. If you're delivering software, especially we're infrastructure software, right? So our software deploys into our customer's web stack. That means all of a sudden it's not just the SEO team, the marketing team. You've got the product team, the engineering team, the infrastructure team, the infosec team, the legal team, the finance team. Literally, it could be, you could have 10 stakeholders, each of whom can kill a deal, and all of whom have to be on side before you can close the deal. So sales cycles are longer, deals fall apart in annoying ways at late stages, and I think we just have to continually get better at that. And the model that I've been quite most excited about recently is recently read the book The Challenger Customer, which is the follow-on to the Challenger Sale, and it talks about we as business owners and as technologists, we get very excited about talking about the way that things are going to be great if you take our product, right? Here's how incredible SearchPilot is. Here's how wonderfully your SEO testing program could run. And the hypothesis of the book, which backed by a load of research, is actually it's more powerful to show them the pain that they're in right now. They actually need to understand better that it's really tough if you're not running SEO tests. If you're running a major website with tons of traffic and you're not doing SEO testing, or you're not doing it scientifically, or you're not doing it with an easy to use product that means your SEO team can run those experiments, you're actually in a very difficult, dangerous, challenging position. And that, again, I'm on this learning journey, but that's something that I've been learning about recently
Also
and enjoying.
highlighting the opportunities, like you're here and you can reach like this level with improved process or additional service. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it sounds like a crime that you are stealing money that you could earn from your team because and from your product. Yeah,
Mhm.
because you're
Yep.
losing the opportunities. Nice. Regarding the building the product, yeah. So you already had some technical stuff, technical people who were working on agency, and then they switched to the product. What about other people? Maybe some other hires, some expertise you had to find for your product. For example, designers. Did you have designers in your team? If not, how did you build design expertise? Because in B2B sales, they say that maybe design is not number one differentiator as for now, or at least maybe a few years ago. Do you think that user experience of your product helped you to differentiate on the market, or it's mostly still about features?
It's a great question. I think actually it's an area where we're hoping to see big strides in the future, and we probably haven't invested as much as we would have had to if we were building a B2C product, or because I think broadly speaking, that's right, that especially enterprise products are bought for their capabilities more than they're bought for their user experience and their design. So we did used to have designers in the team in the agency days. We actually don't have full-on dedicated design resource in the software company now. We work with outside freelancer and contract designers, and we obviously have some design capabilities, particularly in our front-end engineers. But so we've been through a few cycles of working with on specific projects with outside designers. Our whole public-facing website was built by an agency, and so we've brought in those capabilities more as we've needed them. I think actually the things that we've tended to hire. So we have recently been on a journey of hiring more experienced folks into our engineering and product team. So where I think as an agency we were very good at taking newer, less experienced, early career folks and giving them the time and space to develop and become phenomenal contributors. And that's still quite a big thing in our professional services team because we really know how to develop, an SEO consultant. Right, we've been doing that for decades. What we've been finding recently is actually that there's a big. It's very powerful to hire engineers in particular who can hit the ground running, know what they're doing, have done this before, and I would say our last few hires, front end, back end, and DevOps infrastructure, have all been more experienced folks who have been senior somewhere else, and that is a new thing. Actually, that's a new area of learning, as well as that. I think with the way that with software being higher margin, higher retention, etc., if we can bring somebody in who can be materially better, the business model can afford to hire those more senior, more experienced folks a bit more. So I suspect that trend is going to continue. And as we add design and UX into the team, no doubt we'll go looking for folks who've been there and done that.
Yes, that's interesting because part of the value proposition of agency for their teammates is helping them to grow. But for product, usually you don't have so much time to develop your team. Your main business is building the product, and in this case, you would want to focus mostly on people who already know how to do the stuff and to be more competitive than other teams.
Yes, we talked earlier about the pros and cons of the agency model and the software model for the owner or the founder or the senior team. I think it's also true for employees. I think agencies are wonderful places to get a start, and they're great places to accelerate your early career. And then some folks find they love that work and they want to become the senior contributors. But I think for a lot of people, a career path that makes sense is agency early on, and then moving either in house or product or wherever
Or create
as
your
they
own
gain more
product.
experience. Yeah.
The best case scenario, and my dream is that most of people who work at Siden at end will found their own product or become co-founders at least.
So, I mean, for those who have that dream, I don't think that's for everyone, but definitely. And when I look back over the years, and actually it's why we built it right into the mission and vision of SearchPilot. So we have our mission, which is what the product is seeking to do, essentially, which is to prove the value of SEO for the world's biggest websites. But we have a second part of our purpose, which is the vision of creating, proving that you can create a great place for folks to work from diverse backgrounds within a high performance technology business. And we made that a kind of top level thing. That's not in our values. That's actually in our purpose, because looking back over what was at the time when we sold it, 15 years of distilled, is everything else comes and goes. But the things that you really remember are those little times where you made a difference to a human being, to a person's life. You gave them an opportunity, hired them, developed them, gave them a platform to grow from, and I mean that those are all the stories that you look back on and remember. Whether they go on to do their own thing, whether they stick with you and you're still working with them decades later, or they go and they become a CMO somewhere. Like there are many different paths, and all of those can be really exciting and really fulfilling, I think.
We have a section that we call Futurism, about vision and about ideas. So, what are your thoughts about the futures when you will create a website that will use AI to automatically generate the content? Like you have A/B testing software. Maybe next stage of your product would be saying, let's AI decide what kind of content we should show for this person based on demographics, based on the weather, time. We run some R&D tests, and I've checked if it's possible, providing the prompt. So this is a young mother of a small child. She is looking to buy a stroller, and she is from Berlin, and she has some questions about what to do with her baby. And it could automatically generate based on the outline. So the IP would be the outline and maybe databases, recommendation on parks, what kind of transport you can use. Do you need to buy a sitting chair for your baby to use a taxi? Check the weather, what kind of clothing you would use. So it generated very specific response, like a web page landing with all the images and everything that was related very closely what person needed. And in this case, like every e-commerce site would, if they had enough information about the need of the person, could generate a specific page just for this person. Or we know that there are some experiments where agents crawl the internet, see what other sites are writing, create an outline, adapt it for their specific user, and then generate a static page. But at the end, in a few years, we could have dynamically generated pages, and every page would be different. But in this case, perhaps Google will have trouble to understand what you are showing for different users. It's more like an application. So, what are your thoughts? This something we can expect in the future, that websites will become applications that were super personalized and generated for you?
I'm sure some will. I think my zoomed out prediction is these are the kind of predictions that are hardest to make. If you look at when you see early predictions of what the internet would be used for, or what mobile phones would be used for, or these kinds of things, the details rarely look like the imagined version. So I'm sure some of these capabilities will come along. Whether they will end up being used for those things and in those ways, I think that's where the uncertainty comes in. Um, I I'm fascinated by the life cycle of ideas when you realize that the current generation of large language models are trained primarily on content that was not generated by large language models, right? It was all written by humans. But the next generation is going to have large language model generated content in the training set. And I think there's going to be another kind of inflection point or tipping point as we realize that garbage in, garbage out, right? If the large language models aren't good enough yet, but they're being used, and then you start using that as training data, you end up with a very dangerous position. That's part of it. I think personalization is huge, and we work. A number of our customers have a great deal of personalization, especially on the e-commerce side, like you say. I think one of the realizations, though, is that people are less different than you realize, and actually, how significantly different are those pages going to end up within within a cohort? And if that cohort is big enough to be commercially interesting, you know, new mothers who live in the UK or something like that group, you may find that the personalization is kind of not actually the main point. You end up with some degree of it around the edges, but if you want to read a news story, or you want to find the best laptop, or you want whatever it might be, the personalization is maybe less than you might anticipate. So I think I'd fall back on my prediction of when we were talking about the 5 or 10 year future of search, and say a lot of this stuff will change slower than you might imagine. I think, yes, there'll be perplexity, and there'll be whatever the next startup is that does some of these things, but then you'll still go on an e-commerce site that looks like the e-commerce sites we see today, and buy a product and check out and put your credit card details in, or Apple Pay or whatever. And I think that will still be a very common experience in 5 years' time. And so I'm excited by the technology and the opportunity, but I don't think everything upends overnight.
Yeah, there is some adoption of technology. Like there
Sure.
are always some early adopters, but the majority is still lagging. So,
Of course,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, totally the way. And I think some of that is accidental, some of it's deliberate. Some people want to continue doing it the old way. Some people are scared of the new way. All of these things are fine, and I personally am quite excited to use the new stuff. But uh, I also realize that I'm not everyone, and I'm not necessarily typical.
Yeah. So maybe we will wrap up today's conversation. So thank you very much for your amazing insights and your perspective of the future, and your expertise on the SEO and how this specialty is like works with product team, how it could improve the product. So we were very we were really happy having you today.
It was a really fun conversation. Thank you very much for hosting and for really insightful set of questions. I think we've gone down quite a few exciting and interesting
Nuggets.
different avenues there, and it's been really fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Have
thanks.
a great day. Guys, thank you for joining us today in this episode. I hope you did like this conversation. Please share your thoughts and ideas in the comments, what you found most insightful, and maybe you share your experience with working with SEO specialists. Looking forward to you subscribing to our channel. We love to see our subscription base growing so we could provide value to more people. And feel free to share it to your friends and family. Thanks.